In this video, I want to talk to you about Dan Koe's podcast strategy. I feel like if people knew that you could do it this way, more people would be open to trying podcasting. Because most of the time when you think of podcasting, you think of an interview guest-based format. And so Dan Koe, if you don't know, he has millions and millions of followers across multiple platforms: X, Instagram, YouTube, you name it. YouTube videos are really enjoyable to watch because they are really long form and really well thought out, and he is somebody who has shared publicly his content strategy, and so I want to take a second to highlight that. By the way, my name is Misbah Haque. My very first podcast I launched out of my childhood bedroom, and within 1 year I was able to use it to get my dream internship, my dream job, and then in that dream job I got to help my boss launch my next show, which did over 1 million downloads. And then in 2020 I went all in on Pod Mahal, and we do consulting and done for you production. So anyways, some of the things that I wanted to highlight for you in this video is going to be revolving around the holistic approach that Dan Koe takes. So his podcast strategy isn't necessarily fully a podcast strategy. What he's doing from it is he's technically starting with his newsletter. If you watched his videos, he shared that. He uses his newsletter as a chance to write his pillar piece of content. And that is the thing that technically goes out first. And then that is the thing that becomes a script for which the YouTube video is then filmed. And then the podcast is simply the audio version, if you're listening to it on Apple and Spotify, of the YouTube video. Now on Spotify, because they allow video episodes now, and he already has a video for YouTube, he's been uploading, all of the video ones, so you could consume video on Spotify as well. If you look at the description, by the way, on any of his YouTube videos, the way that it's broken down is so simple and upfront, which is what I appreciate about it. Okay, you can sign up for the newsletter, which is basically this YouTube video, but in advance. You can subscribe to the podcast, which is an audio version of what you're seeing right here. And many people, if you look in the comments, actually do listen to the audio version just as a reinforcement or reminder, because a lot of the episodes are longer. It works well for a podcast format. Now, when you go to the CoeCast, when you go to the podcast, it's got a bunch of reviews. It's doing great, right? But if you look at the links in the description, this is one of the biggest lessons. All of the important links are actually there. So it is now being used as another asset without really doing much work, because that video was already made for YouTube. And to extract the audio and not really add much to it is pretty easy, right? But getting that disclosure up front is something that we can learn from, because Dan in the description says, hey, this was originally a YouTube video, and that's all it takes. If you just say that up front, sometimes people go, okay, cool, I'll keep that in mind when I'm listening to this, right? If you did a live keynote and you were speaking somewhere, okay, and you gave that heads up, you can actually air that on your audio feed if you just tell your audience that, that's the context of what's happening. So I think a lot of times in podcasting, we can overcomplicate it, right? Crazy production, crazy guests. But one of the things that I love about Dan's format is that it's solo. There are no guests, right? And I root for solo podcasts more than anything, because it is so difficult to make it work and to grow it. And when you actually do grow it, you notice a loyalty that is unmatched with other types of shows and styles of content creation. YouTube is probably the thing that comes closest to it, but it takes longer to grow a solo format show. But in the long run, people are coming for you. They're not coming for just the guests, right? Now, I will say Dan has featured guests on his show, but primarily it is a solo episode, which is really the YouTube video. And because the YouTube video is solo, the podcast is solo, right? What's interesting to note here is that the newsletter is where Dan pulls the 3 pieces of content from per day. So the 3 tweets that he uses to write, or encourages that method of, creating content and growing an audience, is coming from the pillar piece of content, which is the newsletter, right? And because it's, you need to kind of script it anyway, sometimes bullets are fine, but to have more detail always helps, because it just shows that you've, kind of clarified your thinking around this, even if you don't follow it word for word. Now for a YouTube video, you don't have to nail it word for word, but you have something that has a lot more structure to it. And I encourage you to take a look at the style of some of the older YouTube videos, right? Where it's just talking head, there's a podcast microphone, there are, the B-roll is like black background, white text on top, super simple stuff. And my guess is that sometimes if I don't know if Dan did this, but if Dan's reading from the screen just to kind of nail a certain part of it, that part will be the thing that's B-roll on top of, the black background. So using that text as a way to add B-roll, but also cover up anytime you're looking away from the screen or reading something, which again, I don't know if Dan did that, but if he did, it's a genius way to actually record a video podcast, because you might be looking down at notes from time to time. And, B-roll is a great way to do that, where you're just displaying simple text. And really, I think templatizing that, right? So Dan has done a great job of that's kind of his format, right? He could do a lot of crazy stuff. Sometimes he is, but for the most part, he's sticking to that format. So if you can templatize, okay, this is the font I use, this is the style I use, these are the couple colors I like, right? It becomes way easier for you to replicate that if you decide to take your podcast into a video version. And now making your podcast something that is not, hey, look at my show, this is this special thing, right? But being more like, oh yeah, it's just the audio version of my YouTube, which is kind of my main thing, still allows your YouTube to be the main thing. And you want subscribers there. There's a lot of growth and good stuff that comes from it, but it gives a massive portion of your audience who likes audio a chance to actually utilize it. Not to mention, there's tons and tons of people on Apple and Spotify who are not on YouTube and consuming it there. They might just discover the Koecast from those platforms. So you get access to a new audience without really doing much work. I think Dan Koe does a brilliant job of demonstrating how you can repurpose your content, repurpose your ideas through multiple platforms in a way where people still will consume it everywhere. Even though I know I just watched it or I've seen this already in another format, I'll still consume it sometimes because it's a great reminder. And so that's the power if you are making evergreen pieces of content in a podcast format. It's simply a vehicle, a convenient vehicle to get people to consume the audio version. That approach to podcasting is not bad, right? You don't have to have it be like, I need big guests, I need a new studio, I need all this crazy stuff. It can simply be a repurposing and an audio format that's available of a lot of the other stuff that you're already doing. Okay, so if you're doing a lot of video, you're doing a lot of YouTube videos, you're doing a lot of Zoom calls, right? Think about how you can take that stuff and you can turn it into audio. And once again, if you're writing newsletters already, right, it's a great way for you to take that, read it again, reformat it, repurpose it, take out stuff that you wish you didn't have in there, and add stuff that you do like. And you'd be amazed sometimes the reach that you might get by repurposing it into a different format. So I hope this was helpful. If you are somebody who's on the fence about podcasting and you're trying to figure out the format and how you want to kind of do it, I hope this gives you a style to think about and kind of stretches your mind for how you can make podcasting work for you instead of you just doing it for the sake of podcasting, right? So I hope this was useful. Drop a comment if it was, and let me know if you have any thoughts. And also check out some of the links and all that good stuff in the description below. I appreciate you taking the time hanging out, and I will see you on the next one.